My name is Daniel Carter, and for most of my life, I believed doctors were the people who could fix anything. When you were a child, you thought doctors were almost like superheroes. They wore white coats, spoke calmly, and somehow knew what to do when everyone else was scared. I believed that until the night I lost my wife. Her name was Emily. She was 34 years old, had a laugh that filled every room, and always believed that bad days were temporary. We had been married for 7 years. We lived in a small house outside Columbus, Ohio, where Emily worked as a kindergarten teacher and I repaired heating and cooling systems. We weren't rich. We didn't have expensive cars or a huge house. But we were happy. At least, I thought we were. That Friday evening started like any other. Emily had called me from school around 5. "Don't forget," she said, laughing. "You promised we'd get pizza tonight." I didn't forget. You forgot last time. That was 1 time. 2 times. I smiled. Okay, 2 times. I'll be home in 20 minutes. Good. I'm holding you to it. Those were the last normal words she ever said to me. 20 minutes later, I was driving home when my phone rang. It was Emily's sister, Sarah. Her voice was shaking. "Daniel, there's been an accident." I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers hurt. What happened? Emily was driving home. Everything after that happened too quickly. The hospital, the flashing lights, the smell of disinfectant, a nurse asking me questions I couldn't understand. What's her blood type? I don't know. Does she have any medical conditions? No. Any medications? No. Then a doctor came running toward me. "Mr. Carter?" I stood up. "Yes?" "I'm Dr. Michael Reynolds." He looked exhausted but calm. "Your wife was brought in with severe internal bleeding. Her car was hit at an intersection." I felt the room spinning. "Is she going to be okay?" He paused. "We're doing everything we can." That sentence terrified me more than anything else. Because people don't say we're doing everything we can when everything is going to be okay. They say it when they're afraid it won't be. Then another ambulance arrived. A young man was rushed through the emergency doors. I barely noticed him. He looked about 20 years old, wearing a dark work uniform covered in blood. A nurse shouted, "We need another trauma team!" Suddenly, the quiet emergency room became chaos. Doctors ran in different directions. Nurses shouted instructions. Machines began beeping. I stood against the wall, helpless. Then Dr. Reynolds came back to me. "We have a serious problem." My heart stopped. "What?" "Your wife's blood loss is extensive. She needs surgery immediately." "Then operate." "We need blood." "Give her whatever she needs." "We're almost out of O-negative." I stared at him. "Then find more." He looked toward the other trauma room. "The young man who just came in also needs emergency surgery. He's O-negative." I didn't understand what he was saying. What does that have to do with Emily? Dr. Reynolds lowered his voice. "We only have enough blood available for 1 patient right now." I felt something cold move through my chest. "1?" He nodded. "Yes." I looked through the glass doors toward the operating rooms. My wife was somewhere behind one of them. A stranger was behind another, and both of them were fighting for their lives. "Who gets it?" I whispered. Dr. Reynolds didn't answer immediately. Then he looked at me. "We have to make a decision." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're the doctor!" His face became pale. "Yes." "Then you decide." He looked toward the operating room, and after a few seconds, he walked away. I didn't know it then, but the decision he was about to make would destroy 3 lives. My wife's, his, and mine. I stood outside the emergency operating rooms, staring at the closed doors. Every few seconds, I looked at the clock. 8:17 p.m., 8:19, 8:23. Time had never moved so slowly. Sarah was sitting in a chair across from me, crying silently. "Daniel," she whispered, "what did the doctor mean?" I couldn't answer. I didn't know how to explain that my wife's life had somehow become a choice. A nurse came rushing past us. "Excuse me," I called. "My wife is in there, Emily Carter." The nurse stopped. "Are you her husband?" "Yes." She looked at me with sad eyes. "The surgical team is working." "Is she getting the blood?" The nurse hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. What does that mean? I can't discuss another patient's treatment. I'm not asking about him. I'm asking about my wife. She looked toward the operating room. "I'm sorry." Then she walked away. I felt anger rising inside me. I ran toward the doors, but a security guard stopped me. "You can't go in there." "My wife is dying!" "I understand." "No, you don't." My voice echoed through the hallway. "My wife is in that room, and you're telling me to stand here and do nothing?" Sarah grabbed my arm. "Daniel, please!" I pulled away. Then I saw Dr. Reynolds. He was standing at the end of the hallway. I walked toward him. "Did you give the blood to the other patient?" He didn't answer. "Doctor." He finally looked at me. "Yes." The word hit me harder than I expected. "Why?" The young man had a better chance of surviving the surgery. I stared at him. "You decided my wife should die because he had a better chance?" "No." "Then what did you decide?" He swallowed. "I made the decision based on medical probability." I laughed bitterly. "Medical probability?" I could barely speak. "Her name is Emily. She's a person, not a probability." His eyes filled with sadness. "I know." "No, you don't." I stepped closer. "You don't know her. You don't know how many children she taught to read. You don't know she leaves the porch light on when I'm working late because she says she wants me to feel like someone is waiting for me." My voice broke. "You don't know anything about her." Dr. Reynolds looked down. "I know." "Then why did you choose him?" He didn't answer. And somehow, that silence hurt more than his explanation. Then the operating room doors opened. A surgeon stepped out. "Dr. Reynolds." They spoke quietly. I watched Dr. Reynolds' face change. "What happened?" I asked. He looked at me. "The young man's surgery is going well." For 1 second, I felt nothing. Then I asked the only question that mattered. "And Emily?" He looked toward the operating room. We're still trying. With what? He didn't answer. I already knew. Without enough blood, her body was losing the fight. I sat down. Sarah put her arms around me. I closed my eyes and remembered Emily laughing in our kitchen that morning. She had been making coffee. She had looked at me and said, "Promise me we'll grow old together." I had laughed. That's the plan. Now I couldn't stop thinking about those words. That's the plan. At 9:06 p.m., the operating room doors opened again. This time, Dr. Reynolds walked out alone. He slowly removed his surgical mask. I stood up. He didn't need to say anything. I could see it in his eyes. "No," I whispered. He walked toward me. "Daniel!" "No." "I'm so sorry." I shook my head. "No. You said you were doing everything you could." "We did." "Then why isn't she coming out?" His eyes filled with tears. "Emily went into cardiac arrest." My knees became weak. Sarah caught me before I fell. "Did you save her?" Dr. Reynolds closed his eyes. "We couldn't." The hallway disappeared around me. The lights, the voices, the machines. Everything became distant. My wife was gone. And somewhere behind another set of doors, the young man whose life had been chosen over hers was still alive. I didn't know his name. I didn't know his story. I only knew that I hated him. At least I thought I did. But the next morning, I would learn something that would make me question everything I believed about that night. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the hospital parking lot until sunrise, staring at the building where my wife had taken her last breath. Sarah had gone home a few hours earlier, but I couldn't leave. How could I go home? Our house still had Emily's shoes by the front door. Her coffee mug was probably still sitting in the kitchen. The pizza I had promised her was still in my car. Everything in my life was waiting for someone who would never come back. At around 7 in the morning, I walked back inside. I needed answers. I found Dr. Reynolds near the nurse's station. He looked like he hadn't slept either. When he saw me, he stopped. "Daniel." I looked at him. "I want to know who the other patient was." He took a breath. "Why?" "Because you chose him." His face tightened. "I understand why you're angry." "I'm not asking you to understand." My voice was quiet. "I'm asking for his name." Dr. Reynolds hesitated. "His name is Noah Bennett." Noah Bennett. I repeated the name in my head. "How old?" 21. I felt my jaw tighten. "Does he have family?" "His mother is here." I looked away. For a moment, I imagined another mother sitting somewhere in that hospital, waiting for her son. Then the anger returned. "Is he alive?" "Yes." I nodded slowly. "Of course he is." Dr. Reynolds didn't respond. I turned to leave. Then he said something that stopped me. "Daniel, there's something you should know." I turned around. "What?" Noah wasn't just another accident victim. I frowned. "What does that mean?" Dr. Reynolds lowered his voice. "He was driving the other vehicle." My heart stopped. "What?" He was the driver who hit Emily's car. I stared at him. Suddenly, everything inside me became hot. You saved the man who killed my wife? He didn't know he was going to hit her. That doesn't change what happened. I know. Then why? Because he was dying. I laughed bitterly. And Emily wasn't? Dr. Reynolds looked down. She was. I walked away before I said something I would regret. But I couldn't stop thinking about Noah. The man whose life had been saved with the blood my wife needed. The man who would wake up that morning while Emily would never wake up again. I wanted to hate him. It felt easier than grieving. A few hours later, I went to the hospital chapel. I sat alone in the back row. There was a small wooden cross on the wall, and sunlight came through the colored glass windows. I whispered, "Emily, I'm sorry." I didn't know why I said it. Maybe because I had promised to protect her. Maybe because I had failed. Then someone sat beside me. It was an older woman. Her eyes were swollen from crying. "Are you Daniel Carter?" I looked at her. "Yes." She took a shaky breath. "My name is Linda Bennett." My heart sank. Noah's mother. She nodded. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she began crying. "I don't know what to say to you." I looked away. "You don't have to say anything." "Yes, I do." Her voice broke. "My son told me what happened before his surgery." I looked at her. "He was awake." "Only for a few minutes." She wiped her tears. "He kept asking about the woman in the other room." I felt my chest tighten. "He knew?" "He knew there was another patient who needed the blood." I stared at her. "What did he say?" Linda looked at me. "He said, 'Don't let them save me if she has a better chance.'" I couldn't breathe. "What?" "He wanted them to give the blood to your wife." I shook my head. "Then why didn't they?" "I don't know." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "He asked me to give this to you if he survived." I stared at the paper. My hands were shaking as I opened it. There were only a few words written in uneven handwriting. "I'm sorry. I didn't see her. Please don't hate me." I read it again, then again, and for the first time since Emily died, my anger began to crack. Because the stranger I had blamed for everything hadn't wanted to live at her expense, and suddenly, I realized there was someone else I needed to confront. Dr. Reynolds. Because Noah had made a choice. Emily had made a choice many times in her life to help others. But the doctor had made the final decision, and I needed to know exactly why. That afternoon, I found Dr. Reynolds in an empty conference room. I placed Noah's letter on the table. "Tell me the truth." He looked at the paper. Then he closed the door. "There is something I never told you about that night." His voice was barely above a whisper. The decision wasn't as simple as I made it sound. I stared at him. "What aren't you telling me?" He looked directly into my eyes. "The blood wasn't the only reason Emily died." "The blood wasn't the only reason Emily died." Those words stayed in my mind. I stared at Dr. Reynolds across the conference table. What does that mean? He sat down slowly. When Emily arrived, her injuries were already severe. She had internal bleeding, a damaged artery, and a serious head injury. I swallowed. But you said she could survive. She could. Then why did you choose Noah? Dr. Reynolds looked at the floor. Because I believed Noah had a higher chance of surviving. I felt anger rise again. You already told me that. I know. Then what aren't you telling me? He was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, I made a mistake. Those 3 words were harder to hear than anything else. What kind of mistake? I focused too much on the numbers. He looked at me. Blood pressure, heart rate, injury scores, survival percentages. I convinced myself I was making the most logical decision. And you weren't? I don't know. His voice broke. But I know I stopped seeing 2 human beings. I started seeing 2 cases. I looked at him. So, you admit you chose wrong? He closed his eyes. I admit I may have. I wanted to hate him. I wanted him to be a monster. But he wasn't. He was a tired man who had made a terrible decision. And somehow, that made everything more painful. Did Emily have a chance? He nodded. Yes? How much of a chance? If we had gotten her into surgery sooner and controlled the bleeding earlier, she might have survived. The room became completely silent. I felt tears running down my face. So she might still be alive. Yes! I stood up. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Then I said, You didn't just lose a patient that night. Dr. Reynolds looked at me. You lost my wife. He lowered his head. I know. I walked out. For months, I couldn't forgive him. I couldn't forgive Noah either, even though I knew it wasn't his fault. And I couldn't forgive myself. Every morning, I woke up expecting Emily to be beside me. Every night, I remembered that stupid pizza promise. Eventually, I stopped going to work. I stopped answering calls. I stopped being the man Emily knew. Then, one afternoon, I received a letter from Noah. He had survived his injuries. He had spent weeks in the hospital. The letter was simple. He told me he remembered the crash. He remembered seeing Emily's car. He remembered losing control. And he said something I never expected. I wish I could give you my life. I cried when I read that. Not because I wanted him dead, because I finally understood something. Noah was carrying his own kind of pain. He had to live knowing another person died because of an accident he caused. He wasn't my enemy. He was another broken person trying to survive. A year after Emily's death, I returned to the hospital. I found Dr. Reynolds. He looked surprised to see me. I thought you'd never come back. I almost didn't. I placed something on his desk. It was a photograph of Emily. She was smiling in our backyard. This is my wife. He looked at the photograph. She looks happy. She was. I paused. She believed people deserved another chance. He looked at me. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm giving you one. his eyes filled with tears. I wasn't saying what he did was right. It wasn't. His decision had consequences. But I had finally learned that holding onto anger wouldn't bring Emily back. Before I left, I said one final thing. Never forget that every patient has a name. Dr. Reynolds nodded. I won't. I walked outside into the morning sunlight. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel completely empty. Emily was still gone. That would never change. But her love had taught me something I had almost forgotten. Life isn't measured only by how long someone lives. Sometimes it's measured by how much love they leave behind. And Emily had left me more love than I knew what to do with. I still miss her every day. But now, when I remember that terrible night, I don't only remember the doctor who chose the wrong patient. I remember a woman who loved deeply, a young man who carried unbearable guilt, a doctor who learned that numbers can never tell the whole story, and a husband who finally learned that forgiveness isn't forgetting what happened. It's choosing not to let the pain destroy the life that remains. My name is Daniel Carter, and I lost the woman I thought I would grow old with. But I didn't lose the love she gave me. That is something no accident, no mistake, and no terrible decision can ever take away.